Spoilers ahead. Little Nightmares was a success. Released in 2017, the game had sold at least 2 million copies by 2020. Those are solid numbers for most games to sell, but for a relatively small team's first original game especially, that meant there was more to come from the Little Nightmares property. The first follow-up to the game's release would be, well, it would actually be a comic book that got cancelled after 2 issues, but we're not talking about that yet. We're talking about the DLC, Secrets of the Maw. This is a 3-part DLC which together forms a new campaign with levels called The Depths, The Hideaway, and The Residence. Rather than expanding 6's story, Secrets of the Maw is set in parallel to the events of the original campaign. The 3 levels making up Secrets of the Maw are all a little bit longer than the levels in the main game, so even though this campaign is only 3 levels long, it ends up being close to the same length as Little Nightmares' 5 levels. For all intents and purposes, this is another self-contained Little Nightmares game that just happens to use the original game as a launcher. It follows a new character called the Runaway Kid, who is also trying to escape the Maw, and who crosses paths with 6 in unexpected ways. I don't find Secrets of the Maw as successful as either Little Nightmares proper or Little Nightmares 2, but that's not to say it's a bad game at all. There are parts of this DLC which I absolutely adore, and there are parts I find more frustrating than anything else in the franchise. The DLC's 3 levels can still be bought individually for $4 each, but you really shouldn't bother. They're directly connected enough that you're going to want to play all of them if you play any of them, and the bundle for all 3 of them is only $10 instead of paying $12 buying them piecemeal. I think it makes sense here to talk about each level individually because they're each very different, so let's start off this retrospective by talking about the first level, The Depths. Secrets of the Maw suffers from a very weak start. This first piece of DLC is my least favorite level in the series. The DLC opens on a familiar set piece from the main game. The bedroom, which 6 must sneak through as the janitor patrols by, with kids sleeping in the beds as she passes. This must be set shortly after that, as our character wakes up from a nightmare of being pulled into watery depths and gets up to attempt his own escape. The first knock against the DLC is that the Runaway Kid's design is very bland. It's not nearly as memorable as 6's or Mono's from Little Nightmares 2. I suspect this is because they designed the kid in the bed toward the beginning of Little Nightmares well before this DLC was conceptualized, but they wanted to make it plausible that the Runaway Kid was that same kid from the main game, so they were locked into a fairly dull design. I question that decision because I think what they buy here with familiarity of recognizing a character from a scene in the main game wasn't worth what it cost them. A recognizable, distinct, and memorable protagonist. After following a girl with a flashlight, you soon find yourself in a flooded section of the ship and have to swim your way to safety. One gameplay change worth mentioning is that instead of a lighter, the Runaway Kid ends up using a flashlight, which does behave differently and can be aimed with the right stick. This will end up being very important in Part 3. Each of these DLCs are built around a unique gameplay idea, and the ideas from The Hideaway and The Residence are, in my opinion, much better. But unfortunately, this is Little Nightmares' water level, so I hope you brought a swimsuit. The main threat of this level is a new enemy called the Granny, who you only get glimpses of above the water. She is mostly hiding beneath the water and waiting to hear you splash into it, and so you have to quickly make your way from piece to piece of floating debris in order to survive. Part of the reason I dislike this mechanic is that it's not actually very new to the game. This same idea shows up very briefly in the main game as the threat for a single room, the shoe monster. In that section of the main game, Six has to run from an unseen threat in a room that's filled waist-high with shoes and can temporarily find safety on the tops of luggage. The shoe monster scene is much more memorable because it's not the most simple possible form of this idea. This idea of an unseen threat in the water which you have to scurry from crate to crate to survive is an idea that's shown up a lot in games. For example, 2010's Amnesia: The Dark Descent. The shoe monster feels special because I haven't seen this idea done with shoes before. It's neat. The granny, by comparison, feels more rote than any other enemy in the main games. Another knock against this level is that it feels far too similar to a level from Inside. Inside and Limbo were both pretty clear inspirations for Little Nightmares, but the game generally feels like it does enough to set itself apart from those games. There's a lengthy sequence in Inside set underwater that this level feels too similar to. The idea of a threat lurking underwater and needing to distract it by throwing things in and then running to the exit is basically the same. To be frank, I think the water level in Inside is better than this though. The puzzles and pacing of the level overall are better executed. This level is also visually very reminiscent of the leaky pipes and cold color palette of that game. It's really lacking the aesthetic of Little Nightmares that makes the game feel so unique. This could be a water level not only in Inside, but in almost any game, and that's a big problem. The gameplay here is no great shakes either. A lot of the water sequences are just frustrating and often feel inconsistent when you will and won't get grabbed, and whether your character wants to latch onto things that it feels like you're telling him to grab. A problem with the game in general, but especially here, is that the checkpointing feels off. The chase sequences and tricky jumps would feel a lot less painful when you do fail them if you were placed closer to the execution of the part that might actually kill you. Instead, dying often results in repeating a lot of setup that kills the pacing. There are two sections which I remember feeling particularly bad. One is a long puzzle sequence involving raising and lowering water levels to position a platform that you can jump across, and a crank-turned door that doesn't stay open for long. The timing on this section is tight, and while I'll be the first to admit that I'm not very good at the Little Nightmares games, I ended up cutting it so close that I got crushed by the door several times instead of making it through. Yes, the failure to execute this section's platforming is my failure, not the game's, but each time I did, I had to redo the entire puzzle setup over again, which was simply painful. That is a situation where I feel the game's attempts to frustrate the player if they fail go a bit too far and cross the line into boredom. That boredom is absolutely fatal to a horror game's sense of atmosphere. Another particularly painful section is when you finally manage to kill the granny. This requires you to quickly push a TV down into the water as the granny is trying to pull the whole platform down, and if you're not quick enough, you'll wind up dead in the electrified water with her. Unfortunately, it's very inconsistent whether you can actually push the TV off the platform or not. It took me several attempts of pushing the TV until it finally took, and that had me questioning whether pushing the TV was actually the right move or not, since it didn't seem to be working. No, it's right, it just doesn't work well. Overall, The Depths is the biggest misfire in the entire series. It's not a very fun level from a gameplay perspective, and it doesn't lean into the things that make Little Nightmares special. The second DLC, The Hideaway, is a big improvement over the first. The gimmick of this level is that it's built around the gnomes, which had very little gameplay impact in the main game overall. This level is built in the Maw's furnace room, where coal is burned to power the ship. As you go through the level, you find a ton of gnomes that you can hug, as in the main game. Here though, hugging those gnomes causes them to follow you, and your gnome army can be used to solve puzzles or move heavy obstacles as you gain more of them. This ends up being just about the most puzzle-heavy level in the entire game, with only a few short sequences featuring the janitor requiring you to sneak. Most of the level is simply gathering gnomes, finding the path forward, and using the gnomes to solve puzzles. This works for me, especially since the first DLC was so danger-heavy. It makes this feel like something of a breather level. It also helps that the DLC is unique aesthetically, and stands out more than the depths. While that had the unique hook of being a water level, it didn't visually look that different from the early areas of the base game, whereas the coal-stained industrial vibe of this level really stands out from most of the game, which only has that aesthetic in fleeting moments where you end up between the walls. The DLC is built around a central set piece of the giant furnace, which needs to be constantly fed coal in order to power the carts being lifted into the next area. In order to do this, you'll need to bring gnomes to the central furnace, at which point they'll start feeding coal into the furnace. This means you need to go down various paths to gather gnomes to help you move forward. What's interesting is that once you turn the furnace on towards the start of the level, you can tackle the two remaining branches in either order, which is also a departure from the strictly linear format of the main game and of its sequel. Since there are only two paths to choose from, and you have to do both anyway, it doesn't really matter which you do first, but it is neat on replays being able to tackle the level in a slightly different order. A knock against this DLC would be that it's the least scary of the three, because it's so puzzle-heavy and chase/stealth sequence light. In context of being between the other two pieces of DLC, which are both much darker and scarier, I think it works, but since it was sold separately, I think it's worth mentioning that in a vacuum, I don't think the tone would work at all. There's only one section of the DLC I find especially scary, which is one of the two scenes featuring the janitor. This moment is interesting because it steals our one major advantage over the janitor from us, his blindness. This moment has you sneaking through a pitch-black room with a floor covered in bits of coal. Because it's so dark, you have to be very careful as you sneak through the darkness. On your first time through the area, you have access to your flashlight, but on the way back, you need to carry a fuse, which means you have to rely only on the faint light the fuse gives off and your memory of where it's safe to step and what spots to avoid. The other janitor sequence here is also pretty interesting. You need to use a very loud crank to open a hatch that lets you progress, but unlike when you do this in the main game, the janitor sticks far too close for you to use the crank and escape before he reaches you. This time, you need to turn on a table saw, which will drown out the noise. It's a fun idea and a solid sequence. If there's something this DLC suffers from, then it's being just a touch too long. I think there's a bit of fat here that could have been trimmed. Maybe one section from each of the major paths would make it flow better. This is a minor complaint, though. I can make an argument for either this or the third level being the best part of Secrets of the Maw. I think the third piece of DLC has higher highs, but I also think it has lower lows, whereas this level has no moments that actively annoyed me. Overall, this is a strong level, and I do enjoy this quite a bit. This one ends with the runaway kid riding on the roof of an elevator, and inside we get a look at a familiar face from the main game, the lady. The third level of the DLC is called The Residence, and there are two things I really like about it conceptually. The first is that the level is largely set in the lady's private section of the ship. I criticized the final level of Little Nightmares for being too short and failing to explore this environment, so this DLC righting that wrong goes a long way towards making me like it. It makes the lady and her area of the Maw feel like a more coherent part of the world. The other thing I really like about this level is the format of it. It is essentially an attempt to make a more traditional Resident Evil-styled mansion level work in the format of Little Nightmares. The main hook of the level is that you need to collect 3 statues to fit them into slots in order to progress. Each of these statues are hidden behind different areas of the level, and as with the second DLC, the first 2 can be completed in either order. The first puzzle is in a room behind a bookcase that's hiding a secret door. In order to complete it, you need to notice 3 missing books on the shelves and find the correct 3 books among those strewn about the floor in order to complete each pattern. The second involves a neat puzzle that requires you to look at a wall of photos, and then in the next room, select which photos from the set were actually on the wall. This was fun the first time, though honestly on replays, I just look up the answer because it's hard to pick the photos out with only your flashlight beam. There are also some other puzzles and sequences in between finding the statues that I won't go into, but suffice to say, I think all of this works. It's a cute nod to a different genre of horror game, the environment is creepy, and it's very different from anything we've seen before. The problem is that the third path, which you can access once the first 2 are complete, is very frustrating. This introduces the main enemies for the level, the Shadow Kids. These weird ghost children have, I assume, somehow lost their bodies and want to possess you. If they reach you, then it's an instant game over, but they can be slowed down and eventually destroyed by shining your flashlight beam on them for long enough. This sequence sounds fine on paper, but it just doesn't work. The worst thing about it is that the Shadow Kids have a little charge they can do, even when you have your light directly on them, and it's hard to dodge. Their encounters also usually have them spawned in to surround you, and so you have to very quickly switch your flashlight between targets. The reason this segment doesn't feel right is subtle, but I think pretty significant. The flashlight actually operates differently here than it does anywhere else in the game. In the rest of the game, moving the right stick up and down has you aim the beam up and down, and the direction you aim is controlled with the left stick along with movement. Because this sequence only works if you're able to aim the flashlight in any direction while still moving in a different direction, during these sequences, and only these sequences, moving the right stick up and down aims the flashlight away from or towards the screen, respectively. On paper, this is better, and it probably is better than the alternative, but because you've spent nearly the whole game at this point subconsciously learning how the flashlight works, this feels absolutely awful. Inconsistency in how a game controls, unless it's being deliberately used to evoke something, is a problem. I don't think the flashlight's control scheme changing here is deliberately trying to disorient the player. I think they just felt they had no other options. I would argue that if you need to change something about the fundamental controls of the game to make an encounter work, then the correct option is to completely rework the encounter until that's not necessary. These Shadow Kid sequences are not especially long, they're less than a third of this piece of DLC by volume, but I think they weigh the entire level down. These Shadow Kid sequences are what keep me from calling this the best of the 3 DLCs. Without them, it would be no contest, but they are an exceptionally low in a DLC that I otherwise really enjoy. Once you gather all 3 statues, we move into the ending of The Residence and Secrets of the Maw as a whole. First, we get a quick look at what the lady looks like under the mask. She really doesn't like you perceiving her, and so after a short run, you end up captured by her powers. This is where we get the only really big reveal of the DLC, the only secret of the Maw, which I think this DLC campaign offers. The lady uses her power to transform the runaway kid into a gnome, implying that all of the gnomes might have once been children who were transformed either by the lady or other supernatural forces throughout the world. It doesn't end there either, as we get a very short playable sequence where you run through part of the guest area from the main game until eventually ending up in a familiar room and picking up a sausage. The implication here, of course, is that the gnome that Six grabs and devours towards the end of the original game was in fact the runaway kid all along. Six might not have known what she was doing, but it is an effective gut punch to the player, and it recontextualizes her actions in that scene as being even worse than they already were. I really do love this ending. This is a fairly narrative-light campaign overall, but this is a really good addition to the game's lore. All of these games end on a down note, and this is as down as any of them. It fits the game's themes and overall tone perfectly. After the credits, we end on a very brief teaser for the second game. And that's Secrets of the Maw. This is not a terrible piece of content, but having beaten it a few times now for this video, I don't think it's one I would have revisited after my initial playthrough if I wasn't covering it as a part of this retrospective. I've already covered specific moments that I don't think work in this campaign, but overall, it really just comes down to a problem that a lot of short games and short pieces of media in general run into. If you're only going to be 3 levels long, those 3 levels need to be impeccable. A 22-episode season of a TV show can afford to have a bad episode, but if a 6-episode season does, it weighs down the whole show. A longer game, an RPG that's 60 or 70 hours long, can have short beats that are frustrating, a bad dungeon or a single town with a mediocre story segment, and they don't feel as bad because it's simply less parts per million of the game. The first piece of DLC here really is a bummer to me. I just don't like it, and that means however good the next 2 DLCs were, there's already fully a third of this campaign I don't enjoy. That third I don't enjoy being the first third also means this DLC campaign makes a really bad first impression, which influences my opinion on the rest. Like I said, I don't think this is miserable. I don't think it's the worst thing ever. It is still overall fun to play. I just don't think it lives up to the original game or Little Nightmares 2. If you play those 2 games and really love them and are hungry for more, then yeah, you should probably play Secrets of the Maw. For more casual fans though, or people who were already not fully on board with the gameplay of the main game, I'd say this one is a pretty easy pass, and it's the only mainline part of the franchise I'd say that about. If you've made it this far into the video, I want to say thank you, and to humbly suggest that if you liked this video, you consider subscribing. I'm going to be covering the rest of the Little Nightmares franchise over the next few months before Little Nightmares 3 is released, so if you'd like to hear me talk about Little Nightmares 2, or more obscure parts of the franchise, subscribe so you don't miss those videos. If you haven't seen the first part of this retrospective about the original campaign for Little Nightmares, I'll leave a link in the description below. I'd also like to give a special thank you to my YouTube channel members and my supporters on Patreon who have pledged $5 and above to help me keep making content for this channel. Maxine, Lieria, Theodore Davini, Noah Phoenix, The Smallest Church in Wienerville, Gassan Abunura, Patrizia Frabetti, Sninkelberg, Taylor Blair, Yo-Yo Jojo Mojo, Tsai Voafehi, Dan Luther, Still Just Cow, Jose Armalas, William, Cabbage, Rekka, Alex Smith, Hakan Boyam, Pete Lee, Shiny Empty Head, That's All, Bell Mage, Malachi Murphy, A. Delator, Panosny Koriznik, Pizza Requiem, Edward Clayton Andrew, Rules in Place, Mari SQZ, Raxarox, Mikaru X, Unhealthy Caillou, Sir Darkon, Rachel Aurelia. Thank you all, it really does mean the world to me. Until next time, take care.